Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Cynthia Toolin-Wilson, and this is my radio show, Author to Author. And tonight I'm here with someone that I'm very honored to interview, my friend Charles Rex. I've worked with him and his wife at Holy Apostles for many years, and I'm sure that you will enjoy listening to him tonight. The book tonight, let's see, I think that might be too close, is Poems by His Father. It is My Soul That Sings, Selected Poems of Charles Gordon Rex. So how are you, Charles?
I'm fine. Thank you very much, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I've really looked forward to this. It's a real honor to me to interview you.
Well, thank you. It's an honor for me to be here.
Thank you. Would you like to open us with a prayer?
Certainly. Creator God, because you make all that draws forth our praise and the forms in which to express it, we praise you. Because you make artists of us all, awakening courage to look again at what is taken for granted, giving grace to share these insights with others, and providing vision to reveal the future already in being, we praise you. The good, the true, and the beautiful are a reflection of the blessed Trinity and are the end to which we strive. Love is the path to goodness, reason is the path to truth, and creativity is the path to beauty. Because you are the God of all creation and have made humanity in your likeness and formed your word among us, and in your great work embraced all human experience, we praise you. To you be all honor and glory. Amen.
Amen. So tell us, what is it that led you to create this book?
Well, there is I should start with the fact that there is a documentary on on my brother's and my music careers. My brother is a cellist. He is the principal cellist of the Atlanta Symphony, or was until it retired. And growing up with our father had polio when he was 3 years old, which left him paralyzed in his legs and a portion of his right hand, and also caused a curvature of his spine, which left him in great pain. But in spite of this, he had a tremendous intellect, and he was born with a tremendous amount of musical talent, which just kind of sprang out of nowhere. He became a composer, and also he was also an exceptional poet. And there were times when he would write a poem a day, every day. And his favorite poem to work in was the sonnet. But because of he had his own set of demons, shall we say, because of his illness and the pain and the frustration of lack of education in when he was growing up. He was born in 1909, and there was no provision for educating the disabled at that time. So he had something of a very volatile temper, which led to a great deal of psychological abuse. He would take out the worst on the people who wanted most to help him and to be with him. And it could be very, very difficult. And so I don't have many fond memories of my childhood. And yet, when I read the poetry and hear the music that my father composed, this was a man that I did not know. He was two people, the one that I grew up with, and then the poetry that shows me another man, the one that I did not know. And that's the one that I prefer to know. And so, for some reason, my father very rarely saw to the publication of his own works, whether it be poetry or the music. But they were always for some sort of immediate use. He would write music for radio shows, for example, and things like this. And the poetry, very rarely he ever sent anything off to be published. So there's only like 3 poems that I know of that were published in various magazines. The poetry was often written. He was the voice of the Travelers Insurance Orchestra for a couple of years, and he would also read his own poetry on the show. And so it was, as I say, the poetry and the music was for more of an immediate use, and he didn't really see to its publication. And after he passed away, and I started investigating the music and seeing, and also the poetry, with the idea of getting it published, I realized that this was a person that I really did not know, and I wanted to get to know. And this was what I wanted to be left behind of his work. And so that was the reason why I went through hundreds of poems and picked out 200 of my favorite and published them. I wanted his good work to be left behind, so that the world would know the man that I wanted the world and myself to learn about, the man that I had no experience with.
You know, I watched your documentary when you showed it for the faculty. I think you may have done that more than once, but I was at one of the meetings and was so impressed with his story. You know, it's such a dichotomy between brilliance and a disability that I think caused a lot of anger.
Yes, the documentary came about as an interesting way. A friend of ours who had we had grown up at we were children together, Christina Cassidy of Cassidy Productions. She has made several documentaries, but she wanted to get, when she got to know us and know our father, it had always stuck with her that she wanted to do a documentary about that. And when she started what was at first going to be just a short film, turned into an hour-long documentary, and it has won several awards since she finished it in the year 2016. That was when it was finally released, and it won the classical arts best of festival award in California. It was nominated for best director in the international festival in Madrid, Spain. It won the best documentary at the New York International Film Festival. So it's done very well, and we hope to see it get on Netflix or one of the streaming video programs.
Well, it's a gripping story. So,
well, it kind of starts with my father rarely spoke below about 130 decibels, shall we say. Yes. So that it opens with, you hear his voice as he's yelling about something, and he was a real puzzle of a man, very difficult to get to know, and he had 2 friends, and it was a rough childhood, but I owe so much to him because he would force us to memorize lots of Shakespeare. Now, at the time, I didn't like that, but I am so thankful now that he did. My wife is always amazed that I know so much of these Shakespeare plays by memory. And then the music, he would teach us theory at a very early age, music theory, you know, Bach chorales and things like this, how they were composed. And again, that wasn't what I wanted. I loved the violin. but it was my godfather who discovered that I was going to be good at that. And my godfather was the one who discovered, he was concertmaster of the local orchestra where we grew up. And he discovered I had what is called perfect pitch. I prefer to call it total memory. I just know notes. You ask me to sing you a 448, I can sing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can memorize notes. I just know where they are. And he said, with an ear like that, I should be, violin would be good for me, because a fingerboard on a violin, it's not like a guitar. You don't have frets. You have nothing to guide you except your ear. And so you have to practice till it becomes automatic. You know you just know by feel where the notes are. And so he said that would be a good instrument. And so he taught my father, and he gave me my first lessons. And that was what I really loved. I ever since when that violin was first put in my hands when I was 4 years old, I knew this was what I was going to do. But in spite of the difficulties of growing up with my father, I really do want his works to survive him. He passed away in 1973 of a stroke. Not surprisingly, that he had, because with that pent-up anger that he had his blood pressure was through the roof, and so he died quite suddenly of a stroke when he was only 63. And so it's been since then. I started first getting his poems published in various intellectual magazines like First Things, and they took several of his sonnets, for example. And then finally, I put together the whole. I went through, as I say, hundreds, 600 or 700 poems to get these 200 that I really liked, and had them published by En route Publications, Dr. Sebastian Lafoud, who runs that. And so it was. I'm very pleased and hope that people will like it. It's gotten some nice audience reviews, and that it's available on Amazon.
Yes, so it is. It's quite a thick book of poems, and this is, I assume, a picture of your father.
Yes, he had the quite piercing steel blue eyes.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, there was he was an instructor in Rollins College for a while, and some of the students sometimes would stop by, and there was one in particular. This particular picture was hanging in our living room. As soon as you walked in, he would take that picture and turn it around. He didn't want to be stared at by those eyes. So
that's funny.
Yeah. In the middle of the book, actually, I had several pictures. I showed pictures from his life, and so you could see he could get around on crutches and for a while, but after he got a little older, that became very difficult to do. So he was in a wheelchair for the latter half of his life.
Well, it certainly is a debilitating disease.
Yes.
Once somebody gets it. Now I don't know if it's as serious, but I remember.
Well, we don't have it anymore. The polio. I mean, the vaccine. It's you don't see it in this country anymore. Yeah.
But I remember when I was young, in the 50s, and people were really afraid of it.
Yes. So. Well, I remember the vaccine had come out when I was a child. I remember, and I remember the first time getting the vaccination. It was a shot, and of course, no child needs to get a shot. But then it became a little drop on a sugar cube.
Yes,
you take it that way. So
yes. That made it much more pleasant.
Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, so how did you select these? When you say these poems were your favorites, what was it in particular that attracted you to them?
Well, first off, I wanted to show the broad range of poetry that he would compose. There was philosophical poems. There are personal portraits in this poem. There are some autobiographical poems. And there's some of them are almost kind of O. Henry in their endings. I mean, every once in a while he hits you with a surprise ending with one that you don't expect. And then there are humorous ones, sometimes even kind of a black humor so he had a range, and so I would look. I wanted to pick poems that I thought revealed the man. And so I picked. That was my first and primary goal, is picking poems that revealed the man, and then just ones that showed the technique, the technical prowess that he had for these poems. He was once kind of took a dare he was at a gathering, and somebody said, "Can you just say a sonnet? Can you come up with a sonnet, improvise?" And my father took the dare, and he came out with a sonnet that somebody wrote down, and it's in this book.
Oh, wow.
It's off the top of his head. He composed it.
It's amazing. That's a strong intellect. Really. If someone told me to do something like that, I'd just disappear. And it's like, I'm sorry. See you another day. But that is really impressive.
Yeah.
So,
well, it was, in spite of his handicaps, he became a decent violinist and violist, but he had no opposing motion in his thumb. That was the big problem. So rather than holding the bow like this, he held the bow just with his fingers like this.
Wow.
And in spite of that, he actually was good enough to play in the local orchestra. He was born in Springfield, Massachusetts. And so he played in the local orchestra. But as a late teenager, it became very obvious he had a fantastic baritone voice. And so he became a singer and was quite well known as a recitalist. And as I said, he was the voice of the Travelers Insurance Orchestra. He would sing German Lieder and things like that with them. And as a recitalist, he was known as the one review that I have still didn't crumble away. I still have the newspaper. It said he called him Charles Rex of the Beautiful Voice. And he studied with people like Royal Dadman, who was an RCA recording artist, and also Alfredo Martino, who wrote a textbook on singing, and had members of the Metropolitan Opera who studied with him. And then my father opened up his own studio in New York City. But then he decided he wanted to go into composition, but he had no formal education. So even though he was very brilliant just from reading on his own, but he started to get his high school diploma without previous education, received that in 9 months, and then went to Amherst and Rollins College and graduated in 3.5 years with a 98 percentile. And won the Rollins College's highest award, the Algernon Sidney Sullivan Award. So he got 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Music and a Bachelor of Arts in 3.5 years.
Wow.
So he was very, very impressive intellect.
Yeah, that's that really is something when you think, well, look at you. You have an impressive intellect. You've had an impressive career.
Mine was mostly musical, and when I went to Florida State University and graduated there with a cum laude degree of a Bachelor of Music in performance on violin and a Master of Music in performance on violin. And then I joined the Philadelphia Orchestra under Eugene Ormandy back when it was the Philadelphia sound was very much in awe. Everybody loved it. This lush string sound that Ormady was famous for. And I was there for 8 years, and then became associate concertmaster of the New York Philharmonic under Zubin Mehta and Leonard Bernstein. And so I was there with them for 37 years, and I retired a few years ago. Went on to teach music history at Holy Apostles.
Now, you told us once at school about going to China.
Oh yes, that was really something. My first year in the Philadelphia Orchestra, that was when Nixon was first opening up relations with China, mainland China, and as a gesture of goodwill, as one of the United States ranking orchestras, we got sent to China to give concerts there as part of a sort of a cultural exchange. And that was really unbelievable to see and then as years went by and we would go back to China to see how the difference between China under Mao Zedong and China of now, where cities like Beijing and Shanghai were, when we first went there, were very low. There was nothing any higher than 6 stories, and most of the houses were kind of gray. There wasn't really. Now you go there and you think, good heavens, you could be in any of the major cities of the world, New York, Tokyo, anything. The neon signs, and the only difference between Fifth Avenue and the main street in Shanghai is that the neon signs or the LED signs are in Chinese.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a change.
No, it was something to watch it as we continue to go back.
How many times were you there?
Over the years, 37 years, I was 5 at least that I can think of.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. So
what an experience.
That's one of the things with being in a major orchestra is you tour a lot. So the only continent that there are 2 continents I haven't been on. That's Australia and Antarctica.
Oh.
So yeah,
there's no reason to go to Antarctica as a musician. The penguins, I think, are there, but nothing else.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, so that was my career. I also had something of a solo career on the side. I would go with other orchestras and play different concertos with them. But Zubin Mehta, who was the music director at the time I was with New York Philharmonic when I first started, we were good friends. He was wonderful, and even though I was the associate concertmaster, not the concertmaster, of course he always used the concertmaster for would you get a yearly concerto, but he also gave me one. And in fact, there was a concerto for my brother and I that was commissioned for the 150th anniversary of the New York Philharmonic, and we premiered that with the New York Philharmonic, and Zubin was responsible for the creation of that, though he wasn't music director at the time it was finished, and so it was conducted by another music director. But so I really enjoyed my time in those major orchestras.
That's wonderful. It's a great career.
Yeah.
Really, you're very fortunate.
Thank you. I feel very blessed to have. I was at the right place at the right time, and it was a wonderful thing to see.
Yeah, I imagine. So, could you point out to us maybe some of your favorite poems in here? Read them, perhaps.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. I can. I'll start off with one. Since the sonnet was kind of his favorite poem on which to work, I'll start off with a sonnet. Let's see if I can find the one I'm after. This was the one that he wrote, and this was published by Hearst Magazine Media. I forget which magazine it went in. It might have been Good Housekeeping, I think. That was one of the few that he bothered to publish, and it's called Firstborn, and it was written at the time of my birth.
Oh, nice.
So this is to me. This is my son and hers who bore the weight of him through tedious, heavy hours, until with sweat and pain was opened up the gate, and he thrust out into the first faint chill of dawn and his first consciousness. My son and hers, and yet not ours to own, to clutch as drowning men at straws, or shield as one afraid that life will always prove too much. He is himself, unique, belonging to himself and that great force that gave him birth, and answerable only to the true existence of heaven and of earth. This is our son to have for such a length of time as will suffice to give him strength.
That is beautiful.
Well, I can't help but wish kind of that. The poem is beautiful, but I wish he had acted on it more. This is what I mean by there were two men, one I didn't know, one I did.
Yeah, but clearly the sentiment was there. That's isn't something. Yes, yeah.
No, the poems and the music reveal this man existed. I don't know why he didn't show it more. Well, except as you said, the frustration and the anger and the pain. So,
well, those can change all of us.
Now, if to just switch to something a little bit, I'll read something that is a little different. And this has one of those, this isn't a sonnet, this is a string of couplets. I'm sorry, quatrains. And this has one of those surprise endings that you're not expecting. And it's called Happy to His Arms. Her eyes were bright, yes, that she knew. Her figure lovely, slim. Her hair was dark and waved just right, for she was meeting him. And though she really wasn't scared, her heart was acting queer, for he was handsome, fair and tall, and looked a perfect dear. She hadn't really wanted to meet him till today. They'd seen each other once or twice, but in a casual way. Besides, if people really knew, they might not let her go. And he was so insistent that she mustn't now say no. A final glance into the glass assured her of her charms. Then silently she left the house, went happy to his arms. And that's the way she'd tell it, too, if given but the chance. I'm sure that is the way she died, for Grandma loved romance.
Oh.
The surprise ending.
Oh, yeah, I'll say.
She was going to meet death.
Yep.
So
that's, yeah.
That really hits you between the eyes.
Yeah, it does. It's such a surprise ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of those. And then here's a little one I like. This is very short. It's two men talking. It's called Gemini. There were two of me, you know. It was not I whom she let go. Strange indeed, she never knew the one that you insist was you. Little.
Wow, he had a real insight into human beings, didn't he?
Yes. So, anyway, I hope that gives an idea. But there are many. There's one here. One thing I really like. There's a Sonnet Cycle. It's a complete story told in 16 sonnets. Each sonnet kind of being a chapter of a book. It's called The Last Bloom, and it's somewhat autobiographical of his first marriage. It's really strange, actually. There's more honesty about himself in this. It shows something of what caused the breakup of that marriage, and but it's interesting. 16 sonnets in a row that tell a single story. So I won't. I won't try to read that. That would take the
I
rest
know
of
that, yeah.
that would
But
take,
that's fascinating that someone would do something like that, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, to write 16 sonnets as
yeah,
continuous.
as chapters of a book almost.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, original thought too, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
I feel that that this book, I hope, will not only it was kind of cathartic for me to get this out and really struggle. It took a lot of work because a lot of the poems were in manuscript, and so his handwriting was not the easiest to read.
Mhm.
And also, a lot of them were written back in like the 1930s, 1940s, and so the quality of the paper was not very good. Some of it was just practically crumbling.
Mhm.
And I also found out that I was terribly allergic to that kind of dust. I mean, getting to work on those, I'd be sneezing my head off for the first few minutes, you know, while I was with these things. So.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, he must be very proud of what you've done for him.
I hope so. It's you know, the documentary focuses a lot on the psychologically abusive side of him.
Mm-hmm.
But I so wanted to honor my father as well. I mean, for the good that he could do, and I've not only seen to the publishing of his poetry, but also some of his music.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of things, like there's a suite for two pianos that there is a dual piano team that has been championing it around Europe, and it's an excellent piece. And then there's a song cycle. He was a great admirer of the poems of A.E. Housman, and so he wrote a song cycle. He picked out 4 of A.E. Housman's poems that to him told the story of love and war. And during World War II. Mm-hmm. And so he wrote this song cycle of 4 of the poems that progresses through the history of or the history of a relationship, what happens during World War II. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So those are now also published.
Good. Mm-hmm. So will you do more going forward?
I'm going to try. The thing with the music and the poetry, the only thing that I'm running against is the fact that since my father's talents came to fruition in the 1930s and 1940s, mm-hmm. His poetry is still of an older style, you know, that you don't hear it anymore. Mm-hmm. Poems. He did write some free verse, but mostly he liked the formal structure of poems, and so and his music is not what one would call modern, but it's interesting. When we put the song cycle that I mentioned, the song cycle on A.E. Housman poems, we put that on a chamber music concert with the New York Philharmonic. Mm-hmm. And the concert was reviewed by the New York Times. And even though it was done in the late 1980s, and he had written it in the early 1940s, mm-hmm. The critics said that called the piece the most effective piece on the program.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'm hoping that, you know, there are several composers who, because of the length of their life, would go from one era of music into another era of music, but they themselves wouldn't change. For example, I'm thinking of Rachmaninoff, mm-hmm. who started off as a deeply romantic composer, and he never changed. But he lived into the 1940s, into the era of Stravinsky and the Russian 20th century composers. And he just never could get into that type of writing. And so he stayed as a romantic composer. But now we don't care when it was written. It's magnificent music. So it earns its place. And so I'm kind of hoping that's what will happen with my father's poetry, that even though it was written in the earlier time, that it will earn its place.
Good. It probably will.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. So
if you would like, there is another kind of humorous poem that I like. It starts out kind of deep. Let me see if I can find it here. Just a moment. Just give me a moment here. I'm in trouble here. Just a second. I think I'm going to have to go to the table of contents in order to find it. Just a moment. Yes, there it is. Now, this is called A Conversation in the Rain. And it's a man talking to a tree. Lonely, drenched tree. I'm sorry, let us start that again. Lonely, drenched tree, what do you know of wonders, of God and rain and thunders? You bow your head to every breeze and stand aloof from other trees. Your branches tremble at the blow of every drop of rain or snow. Then said the tree, I've stood here for 100 years and held the birds and known their fears. I've lived when others passed away. I've seen the world in bright array, changed to cold and sparkling white, and heard the winds that howled at night. I've felt these things time and again, and I have found that God is rain. For rain refreshes thirsting flowers. An act of love is drenching showers. An act of love, an act of God, are both the same to we of the sod. I tremble, not because I'm weak. I bow my head, for I am meek, accepting all that comes my way and sheltering those who know dismay. I feel his power in every leaf, and so for me there is no grief. Stupid, drenched man, what do you know of wonders of God and rains and thunders? You don't know much at all, I'd say. You've stood here in the rain all day.
Oh. That's excellent. Good sense of humor.
So again, one of those little surprise endings.
Yeah, that was funny. Yeah. So how many poems do you think altogether he wrote? I think you'd mentioned
Oh
it.
gosh, there must be about 600 to 700.
Wow.
I mean, I could make another volume, I suppose. You know, but I just started out with 200. Just there's one. Probably it was funny. First Things picked up on it and put it first. He could get very profound and very dark. And this is a sonnet called The Last Man. And this was the first one, First Things published after he died. Restrained no more, the last rebelling man, alone as he had always wished to be, sole monarch of himself, with not a clan, nor tribe, nor state, nor nation left that he protesting must obey, has sat him down upon the last green acreage of sod, and woven of the plant grass a crown to show the rotted dead that he is God. To show the dead his is the only face, his thought the only consciousness, his eye the only judge of substance or of space, his skull the only congruence with sky. And singing loud his praise, he spends his breath, extinguishing the universe in death.
Wow.
So what's remarkable about that we got first things forwarded to me a couple of letters, fan letters that this poem got. And one of them was from an English professor. He thought that the author was still alive.
Oh.
And he just was amazed that the first 8 lines of that poem form one sentence. It just there's no real break. And I had to write back and tell him that I thanked him for the poem, but I had to tell him that the poet was no longer alive, and that really disappointed him.
Yeah.
So, that's always been. Actually, that's probably one of the poems that I know by memory of his. I just find it very profound. So.
Yeah. He clearly was a deep thinker.
Yes, there are many philosophical things. The incongruity of nature and civilization. He wrote one poem called "Upon Seeing a White Moth in Times Square," and he calls it a frail alien. What are you doing here? It's a very interesting sort of way of looking at life.
Yeah. Certainly a man you can be proud of when you look at his intellect and his talents.
Yes, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this. I kind of it's kind of a how can I put it? I'm rehabilitating him in my own mind, shall I say? Trying to get to know the man that I would have preferred to have known.
Yeah. I don't think that's unusual when children grow into adults and they've had tough raising.
Yeah.
It's, you want to get to know, that there was more to the person.
Yeah.
And you want to get to know that.
Yeah. So I'm very pleased and grateful that this book was published by En-Route Publishers, and that I hope that people will enjoy it.
Oh, I think they will. Thank
you.
There's a lot of very interesting poetry in it.
Yes.
So, is there anything else that you would like our audience to know?
Well, let me see. There were difficult times. The breakup of the second marriage split my family in two. I cannot blame my mother. My mother and I stayed very close, even though it had to be long distance. But the second marriage broke up, and my brother and sister went with my mother. She moved back to her home state of Pennsylvania. I grew up in Florida, and I stayed to take care of my father. It was something I felt I had to do because he would have been absolutely helpless without someone to look after him. While when I went to FSU, I moved him up to Tallahassee and put him in apartments, and it was when I was graduating and getting ready to look for a job, auditions for other orchestras. Unfortunately, on my birthday, my 21st birthday, his birthday present to me was he had an old German Luger that was given to him by a friend, taken off of a German soldier's body.
Oh.
And unfortunately, he blew a hole in his chest. And missed his heart by millimeters. I mean, it was And I remember that on the evening of my birthday, about 3 o'clock in the morning, a policeman came to my door, knocked on my door, and said, "There's been a shooting over at your father's." And I said, "A shooting?" He said, "You better come with me." So I went with him. I followed him, and I had an old car, real beat up piece of junk. But it's a typical student car. I mean, you could see the road going by underneath you, but the floor pans were rusted out.
Yeah.
But I followed him. I followed him to the hospital, and here he was in the emergency room. And I remember talking to the doctor and looking at the X-rays. And the surgeon knew my father, liked him very much, we were there, and he had on his surgical mask, and he was looking at the X-ray, and you could see this hole through his chest in the X-ray. I mean, you could see it. Went completely through his body, went completely through the bed, and the box spring and lodged from the floor.
Oh.
So and so I asked him, "Will he be all right?" And I'll never forget. He looked at me, and over the surgical mask, I could see a tear coming down his eye, and he said, "I don't know." But he lived through it.
Wow.
So that's that was my 21st birthday. But yeah, so that was kind of a traumatic experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, he was strong, but apparently so are you. To have survived that.
I tried, and then we moved him back to when I joined the Philadelphia Orchestra. Of course, there was no way anymore I could take care of him because I was on the road a lot of the time. We were giving, when a major orchestra gives over 200, about 200 concerts a year, and we were on the road about a third of the time. Mm-hmm. So we moved him to Springfield. He still had family there, Massachusetts, and we found it's interesting. It was a kind of an out of the way travel lodge. You remember that chain, Travel Lodge?
Yes, sure.
And they rented him 2 rooms there, and it was across the street from a funeral home.
Oh.
And I remember that my father said, "I'm going to be there in a year," and he was. He died of a stroke about a year later. Mm-hmm. But for that last year, with his family, childhood family, members of his family there, mm-hmm. He seemed to be getting happier, and it was strange that just as he seemed to be at home a little bit more and feeling a little bit better, that's when he died. So. Mm-hmm. So, by the way, I'll read one more poem. It's the first poem in the book. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of an autobiographical poem. Now, you have to understand that with the curvature in his spine and the fact that his legs have been paralyzed all his life, the musculature in his legs had totally atrophied. Mm-hmm. So his legs looked nothing more than like bones with skin on them. That's skinning. So this poem is kind of autobiographical. It's called "Listen to My Song." Listen to my song, gaze not upon me. My spirit long has broke these earthly chains. My soul has found at last a greener valley, and fetters not itself with human gains. My body, broken, would have tried to bind me, had not my mind reached out to nobler things. Now I am conscious of naught else but beauty, forgetting self, it is my soul that sings.
Mm.
And that's why I picked that as the title of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And it also is, that is the epitaph on his tombstone. We put that there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Oh, deep man.
yeah.
But obviously he found some joy in life if he felt that that his soul sang.
Well, yes, he, probably his happiest time was probably during the 30s when he was on radio as a baritone soloist, and he would read his works over the radio and this sort of thing. It was the NBC Red, what do they call it? The Red Network, NBC Red Network. There were two, red and another color. I forget. It might have been blue. So the station that he was on was it was WTLC, Traveler's Life Company.
Mm-hmm.
It was an old radio. I don't know if that is still even around. But so he was on that, and that's the station on which he was baritone soloist, and he'd read his poetry and things like that. And then he moved to New York to study with Martino, and then he opened up his own voice studio. So that was kind of the really the high point of his career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's had an interesting life, and he certainly, I
wrote a kind of as much as I could. It's less than a chapter, but I kind of wrote what I would call something of a definitive biography. It begins the book of poetry. I write his biography, and it. So I in going through the poems, I came upon other things. I found an old scrapbook. Oh, this was crumbling into dust, but I found things that were still intact, that I was able to piece together some things that I didn't know. And he'd even written a couple of handwritten notes on one of his poems I found. It was handwritten, but he had later years scrawled on it. This is my first poem. I wrote it when I was 17.
Mm.
So that's in the book too. I included that.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah. So, and there's even after the breakup of his second marriage, there's a poem written to my mother, and it's very touching.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted. It's funny. He wanted love. He just didn't really know how to show it very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of that.
Yes.
People want to show the emotion and don't know how.
Yeah.
I think.
But that's where I get. I have a dread might not be the right word. I simply cannot. I can't handle anger. I took the opposite route from my father. I just don't know what to do with angry people. Mm-hmm. I just, nothing is that important. Why get angry? I'm sorry. I just figured it out.
Well, what you're talking about, I think, is common among people who have had tough childhoods. I have a tough child. I had a wickedly tough childhood. And, if somebody starts to yell at me, I do one of two. I have the fight or flight.
Fight or flight.
Yeah. So I either want to start backing away or I want to start advancing to stop it.
Well, I only back away. I just climb up. I just can't handle it. And so I'm very, very happy that my wife Elizabeth is. We never argue.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen. We've been married 31 years, and we don't argue. It is good. It's the only way I can survive.
Yeah.
I married rather late in life. I was 40 when I married Elizabeth. I am so thankful I waited.
Yeah. I think she is too. She really loves you. She talks so positively about you all the time. You are the joy of her life.
She is mine, and we just it's funny. We spend every morning we're up at we get up about 6:30. We go out on the living room couch, and the first thing we do is we talk for a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. Politics, a lot of religion we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm converting to Catholicism.
I didn't know you were going to.
Oh yes, I'm going to have my first confession next week.
Oh, this is wonderful news.
Yeah,
this is wonderful. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. But I feel it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I mean, I came to Christianity. My father wasn't a terribly. It's funny. He had an appreciation of God,
mm-hmm.
But he wasn't into formal religion, shall we say?
Mm-hmm.
There's several religious poems in the book,
mm-hmm.
But the one thing my father did do was that he did for a while. When we were little, we would have a prayer time before we went to bed, and we would kneel by the side of his bed. Of course, he couldn't kneel, but we would pray. And so, but that was my only experience with religion. And it wasn't until my 20s that somebody, a conductor friend of mine, gave me a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict by one of these, by an evangelist. Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting. I became convinced that there was enough evidence to show that there was, in fact, a man who got up and walked out of his tomb. Well, if that happened, I kind of backed up what he said about himself, and that he and God were one, God the Father were one. And so that meant that there was a God. And if there's a God, well, then religion is true. Everything falls into place. I came in the back door. Mm-hmm. And gets up and walks out of his tomb. That kind of backs up everything he said about it. Yeah. So that's how I became a Christian in the first place. But I grew up in the 20s. I joined a Presbyterian church. I was friends with great biblical scholar Dr. James Boyce. But something seemed to be missing. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I think I've finally found it.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I'm a convert myself, so.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I converted because of a religious experience in Rome, of all places.
Really?
Yeah. I'll tell you about it someday. But,
okay.
But yeah,
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. It's just interesting when you think of how many people, that you may not be overly religious. You may actually think there might be something, but you're not sure. Right. And something just clicks, whether it's an experience like I had or whether someone hands you a book that explains something. Yeah. It's amazing how that happens. It's God pursuing us.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. So, excellent. I'm really, really glad to hear. I remember talking to you once. I think we were at Fideus at Ratio. And I can't remember who it was that was speaking, but you had asked a Christology question, and I teach Christology, and we talked for a few minutes after that.
Well, I knew you taught Christology. I'm trying to think of the incident. Do you remember the question I asked?
No, it was about 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, okay.
It was Chris Apodaca, I think, was speaking.
Oh, yes. No, I remember the incident, but I don't remember what I asked.
I don't either. But I do remember you asked something about Christology. And after the talk was over, I turned to you and I was talking to you about it.
Oh, I wish I could remember.
So do I. What can I say?
Now, the one thing that I will say about Dr. Boyce and Protestants is that I did read the Bible several times through. That was that's one thing Presbyterians are very good about, is that they're big on scriptura sola, scripture only.
Yeah.
Which now I understand it doesn't quite work that way, but it's still, nonetheless, I read the Bible because of it, and I'm grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I should tell you about a textbook that I use both in One and Triune God and in Christology. It's by Ludwig Ott. It's,
of course, I've heard of Ott.
Fundamentals of Dogma.
Of course, yes, I have that.
Oh, okay. I love that book. It's, it enables people to see not only where things are coming from in Scripture, but in magisterium and in tradition.
Yes.
So I love that. Because it's like, okay, it's not just here, it's here, 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 and here. And this is the logical conclusion.
Right.
So, I love that book.
Well, I just got, I just bought the big catechism, the one that St. John Paul II.
Oh, yeah.
And you read that, and that's just amazing that that man was such a thinker. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, I feel, is going. He was such a loving man. I mean, just love of such. Eternity. I almost feel it's a little bit beyond me right at the moment. I get into this. I'm thinking, this is so profound. This is going to take study. So, but Ott is good. I mean, it's more concise.
Yes, that's what I like about it, though, because it does give people a variety from the Summa, from Scripture, from magisterium, from the fathers, so that they get a sense, that this isn't just something someone said or someone has interpreted. This
I am an admirer of Aquinas. It's interesting. There's a Protestant theologian, Dr. Norman Geisler, maybe you've heard the name, and he wrote a summary of the Summa Theologica in one volume, it's really good. If you think, how do you get 30 volumes down to one? But he does a good job of it, and I've read that, and it gives you a pretty good grounding in what even Protestants admire him.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, I've been I've been teaching here now 27 years, and I love that. It's just nice. Every year I get new people that I can show these sources to, and it's almost like you have these little kids. I mean, they're adults, obviously, but it's like you have little kids around the table and their eyes open wide with surprise, So I really do enjoy that. Of course, now I just teach online, but I used to teach in the classroom. So
there's a similarity between that and I enjoy teaching music history. Music appreciation, because it's when you get right down to it, music is virtually another language. In the truest sense of the word, you can get a more accurate feeling for what is going on inside of a man from his music than you can from what he says. Music will impart the exact emotion he's feeling at that moment. It will, even in the Baroque era, which was so complex and has these really tight forms like the fugue, or the Passacaglia, or these things, where you're kind of almost in a straitjacket. But Bach, when a fugue in his hands, he was as much a romantic composer as Brahms was in his own way. So it's there's an interesting story about Bach. The famous gold record that was on the Voyager spacecraft that was to go out into space, and we're still receiving signals from it billions of miles away.
Yeah.
When it was first being proposed, several eminent scientists, what should go on to this golden record to show any alien life form? What about our humanity and our culture? And the biologist Louis Thomas said, "Well, I would put the complete works of Johann Sebastian Bach, but that would be boasting."
That's a wonderful story.
So many composers. Beethoven said he is the immortal god of harmony. I'm trying to think of. Gounod said that if all of music was lost, you could reconstruct it with the foundation that Bach laid.
Wow.
So a lot of people, a lot of famous musicians, I among them, feel that if you really had to nail down who was the greatest composer who ever lived, it would have to be Bach. Yes, Beethoven was the great revolutionary, showed us what it was to really have self-expression and stuff. But Brahms also said, study Bach, there you will find everything.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
So that's the three Bs, Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms of German music.
Yeah. Well, I hope someday, if they ever do find life, that they'll be able to play that.
That's something that I worry about. It seems like a strange thing to worry about, but when you think that cultural mankind has been around for about 10,000 years, I guess. But the universe is some 13 billion years old. So, this little sliver of time, what's going to happen to these universe that's so immense? And it's a shame to think of all of that being lost. What's going to happen to all that? And what cultures may have existed before? What about their music or poetry or whatever they had? If there were other alien life forms, intelligent life forms, which also itself is an interesting question. Are we alone? Are we unique? Or were there others? I don't know.
Sebastian was just telling me about a new kind of theology. Exotheology, maybe? And it's it's something to do with people who believe that there's other forms of life elsewhere. So, and what the implications of that are theologically.
I spoke to a minister one time about that, and he said, what if there are other alien intelligent life forms, and what if they haven't fallen? What if they don't have original sin? Christ came to us to relieve us of our original sin and the effects of it. But what if another alien life form did not fall? It's interesting to think about. C.S. Lewis and his it was C.S. Lewis, right, that had the space trilogy. Yes, I'm trying to think of what it is now. I know the one you're talking about, and I can't think of it. He also,
Well, that
he
makes
also wrote
sense.
Narnia.
At least I remembered it exists.
Yeah, he also wrote Narnia. There's another trilogy that Isaac Asimov wrote, but he's not a religious
Mhm.
as far as I know. But I'm trying to think. But I've read it. I can't think of what it is. But you're right. C.S. Lewis would do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. I read it years ago, the trilogy. But yeah. Anyway, lots of interesting questions that will probably never be answered in our time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, we'll know the answers ultimately.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Charles, I have to tell you that I have enjoyed this enormously.
I've enjoyed this very much. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Well, if you come up with another book, we have to do it again.
All right. I've been thinking about it, but we'll see.
Okay. All right. Would you like to close us in a prayer?
Certainly. O God, whom saints and angels delight to worship in heaven, be ever present with your servants who seek through art and music to perfect the praises offered by your people on earth. And grant to them even now glimpses of your beauty, and make them worthy at length to behold it unveiled forevermore. Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen. Well, I certainly have enjoyed this, and I hope we get to do it again. So you have to get to work, chop.
Thank you so much for having me, Cynthia. It's been a pleasure.
It has been. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye.